You wake up in a small, cold, slightly damp cottage. No alarm clock, no blackout curtains, no soft Spotify playlist of rainfall and wails. Just a muffled clatter of chickens, a rooster whose only life purpose is to scream directly into your soul, and the faint but unmistakable sound of a goat peeing on straw in the corner. Yes, it's another glorious morning in your 13th century medieval village. The floor beneath you is made of compacted dirt, generously decorated with the little hoof prints of your most valuable roommates, goats. 2 of them, in fact. One of them is named something like Milda or Snuff Bucket. The other doesn't have a name. You just call her the mean one. She calls you nothing, because she's a goat. Also because she hates you. Your mattress is stuffed with straw and the occasional sharp stick. It smells vaguely of mildew and betrayal. There's a small fire pit in the middle of the room, which has been smoking steadily since sometime around your grandfather's grandfather. The smoke is meant to escape through a hole in the roof, but mostly it chooses to hang out with you and settle in your lungs like an awkward guest who doesn't know when to leave. And now, dear viewer, or should I say, sleeper, before you get too comfortable drifting into the aromatic joy of goat urine and medieval disappointment, do me a small favor, like the video, maybe subscribe if you actually enjoy what I do here, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. It's oddly soothing to know you might be dozing off in Australia at 3 a.m. or in Ohio with a bowl of cereal the size of your regrets. Now, back to your gloriously unfortunate village life. You're not rich. Far from it. You're a peasant. Which is not a slur, it's a career choice, apparently. One that comes with generous benefits like chronic foot infections, seasonal starvation, and being taxed by 3 different people who all claim to own your soul, land, and last remaining turnip. But you do have goats. 2 of them, as mentioned. Which in medieval terms makes you, not poor, not rich, but goat adjacent, which in village social hierarchy places you somewhere above the guy with no animals but slightly below the guy with a pig. The pigman is doing very well, socially speaking. Your goats are multipurpose. They're not just livestock. They are heat sources, dairy machines, lawnmowers, garbage disposals, and occasionally, if times get bad enough, meat. But let's not talk about that yet. For now, they're here, breathing heavily, staring at you with their rectangular pupils and plotting something vaguely hostile. You drag yourself up from your bedding, careful not to disturb the embers or step in something warm and suspicious. Your tunic, one of only 2 you own, smells like every meal you've ever eaten, every task you've ever done, and at least 2 other people. Laundry isn't a priority here. If you wash your clothes more than twice a season, people start asking what's wrong with you. Outside, the sun is doing that weak, gray medieval thing where it tries to rise, but mostly just gives up halfway through. The air smells of cold mud, wood smoke, and the subtle tang of fermented goat. Not unpleasant, just very specific. The village is already awake. You can hear the distant bleating of other goats, the rhythmic thump of someone pounding grain, and the sharp crack of a child being told, in no uncertain terms, to stop licking the butter churn. You begin your day the way all medieval villagers do, by feeding something before you feed yourself. You grab a bucket and head outside, squelching through mud and half-frozen chicken droppings to fetch water from the communal well, a trip you make 3 to 5 times a day, depending on whether your goats are in a hydration era or being mysteriously moody and dry. The goats do not thank you. Gratitude is not part of the Caprine emotional toolkit. They stare blankly as you pour the water into a wooden trough, then proceed to knock it over, step in it, and bleat like it was your idea. You clean up, refill, and move on. This is a normal interaction. In fact, it's borderline affectionate. But let's talk about what these goats do for you, because, in a world where currency is barley and you pay rent in physical labor, goats are your retirement plan. Their milk, for example, is your breakfast, lunch, and occasionally dinner. Not fresh milk, mind you. That's dangerous. Raw, unpasteurized, lukewarm milk straight from an animal that eats moldy twigs and sometimes licks its own backside. Oh yes, that's what's for breakfast. You churn some of it into cheese. Not because you enjoy it, no one really enjoys medieval cheese, but because it's a way to preserve calories without dying of dysentery. The process involves hours of stirring, fermenting, waiting, panicking, praying, and trying to ignore the fact that one of the goats keeps staring at you like it knows something. Cheese is a sort of status symbol. If you have enough of it, You can trade with neighbors, barter for things like salt, wool, or bread made of actual wheat instead of bark and dreams. But more often than not, your cheese is just a hard, slightly furry ball of protein that you'll gnaw on in winter and pretend is a delicacy. Goats also provide fertilizer. Glorious, pungent, endless fertilizer. Your entire garden, and by garden I mean a patch of angry mud with 3 onions and a hallucinating beet, is kept alive by the nutrient-rich deposits of your hoofed roommates. You shovel it. You spread it. You accidentally get it on your hands and then in your mouth. It's a whole cycle of regret and regeneration. And yet, these goats are your pride and joy. You guard them like treasure. You build pens for them. You knit them little ear covers in winter, not because you're sentimental, but because frostbitten goats die, and dead goats don't make cheese. Losing a goat is a tragedy. Not like your uncle died in the plague-level tragedy, but close. If your goat wanders off, you're looking at days of searching through woods filled with wolves, bandits, and something the villagers only call the thing that took old Marjorie. If your goat is stolen, you're entitled to accuse your neighbor in front of the manor court, which is a great way to destroy your social life and maybe get stabbed. And if your goat dies, that's dinner. Sad dinner, but dinner. Of course, not all goats are created equal. Some are cooperative, gentle, reliable milkers. Others are chaotic evil. The mean one, for example, has headbutted you 7 times this week. She has eaten half your cloak and at least one of your shoes. She has also, mysteriously, gotten herself pregnant despite no known male goats being present. You suspect witchcraft. Or maybe Jeff from the next village over. Either way, she's your best milker. Milking a goat is an art form. You wake before dawn, get kicked in the shin, drag her to a rickety milking stool, and begin the sacred ritual of hoping she doesn't poop in the bucket. Some days go well. Other days end in tears, bruises, and questioning your life choices. But without this routine, your family doesn't eat. So you keep milking. Every day. Twice a day. 4 years. And now you're wondering, why goats? Why not cows? Well, because cows are expensive, high maintenance, and need pasture space that you, a humble peasant with 5 square feet of personal property, simply do not have. A goat will eat anything. Grass, bark, your laundry, other goats. They're the cockroaches of the livestock world. Indestructible. Resourceful. Kind of cute if you squint. Your kids, the human ones, not the goat babies, learn early how to help with them. By age 4, they're already herding, feeding, and dodging hooves like tiny shepherding ninjas. It's a family business. And you don't pay them in allowance. You pay them in survival. And maybe a hunk of bread if the harvest was kind. Speaking of bread, your breakfast today is barley porridge. Again. It's thick, gray, and technically edible. You stir in a little goat milk to add some flavor, or at least distract from the fact that it tastes like wet sadness. No sugar. No fruit. Just mush. Your ancestors would be proud. And deeply constipated. As you eat, the goat sneezes directly onto your sleeve. You wipe it off without flinching. This is not your first rodeo. Later in the day, you take the goats out to graze. Grazing is a generous word. More like dragging them to the edge of a field and hoping they find something vaguely nutritious before one of them climbs a rock and attempts to leap into traffic, which, here, means 2 carts and an old man carrying a sheep. The goats wander. You sit. You listen to the wind, which smells of peat, smoke, and unresolved generational trauma. A neighbor passes by and nods. You nod back. That's your social interaction for the day. You reflect on your life, your purpose, your goats. What would your world be without them? You'd have no milk, no cheese, no manure, no status. You'd be just another barefoot mud enthusiast hoping the plague skips your house this year. But with goats, you are someone. Not important, not wealthy, but goat-owning. And in this village, that's enough. The sun begins to set. You round up the goats, a process involving shouting, pleading, and mild emotional blackmail, and trudge back to your cottage. You light the fire, pour a bowl of suspiciously chunky milk, and settle in for the night. Outside, wolves howl. Inside, the goats sleep peacefully beside you, occasionally farting with confidence. You close your eyes and dream of a better life. Maybe one where you have 3 goats. Or a pig. Or maybe even a wheel of cheese that doesn't taste like feet. But for now, this is your life. Medieval. Muddy. Slightly smelly. Goatful. And it's not glamorous. But it's yours. You wake up coughing. Not violently. Just that mild, wheezy sort of morning cough you've learned to accept as a result of spending your entire life inhaling wood smoke, goat dander, and medieval disappointment. The fire's out again. Of course it is. You stoked it before bed with the last of your precious dry kindling, said a little prayer to whichever saint allegedly handles fire logistics, and fell asleep with your tunic pulled up over your nose like a blanket. It didn't work. Nothing ever does. Except the goats. Sometimes. You sit up slowly. Your spine makes a noise. You're 36, which in this era qualifies as old and creaky. You're basically an elder now. Wise. Revered. Hunted for advice you don't have. Someone will probably ask you what to do about their goat's persistent diarrhea before lunch. You'll guess. That's the tradition. The morning light is soft, gray, and judging you. So is your goat. She's been awake for an hour, standing suspiciously close to your head, possibly contemplating whether or not to eat your hair again. You meet her gaze. She blinks slowly. You blink back. The tension is palpable. You both look away. You shuffle toward the door. Your feet are cold. Your ankles hurt. Your tunic sticks to your skin in all the wrong places. The goat farts loudly as you pass. That's your wake-up song. Outside, the village smells like wet leaves, smoke, and unfulfilled dreams. Also manure. Always manure. It's in the air, the mud, the soles of your shoes. You're pretty sure it's in your pores. But it's normal. If anything, it's comforting. The scent of a well-functioning peasant economy. You pass your neighbor, who's already out with her own goats, 3 of them, smug creatures with shiny coats and eyes that say, "Our owner has oats." You nod politely. She nods back. That's the village equivalent of a full conversation. You head to the well for water. Again. Always the well. It's the village's great equalizer. Every peasant, from the lowliest barefoot beet farmer to the inexplicably attractive beekeeper, drags their aching limbs here each morning to haul water in splintery wooden buckets. And guess what? The goats are thirsty. Always thirsty. Even in winter. Especially in winter. No one knows why. It's like they're mocking you. Back at your hovel, the goats jostle each other for a place at the water trough. The mean one knocks the nicer one aside with a sharp sideways jab of her horns, then proceeds to lick the bucket, ignore the water, and start screaming into the void for no apparent reason. It's 6 a.m. You consider screaming back. Instead, you milk her. Milking, in theory, is simple. You sit. You squeeze. You collect. In practice, it's chaos. First, she refuses to stand still. Then, she starts dancing. Then, she sits directly on the bucket and gives you a look that says, "This is my house." You start over. Eventually, a few warm spurts of milk make it into the bowl. Success. Sort of. You add it to your breakfast porridge. The same porridge you ate yesterday. And the day before. And the day before that. You imagine seasoning. Sugar. Berries. Even salt would be nice. But alas, it is once again just barley, water, and goat milk, the holy trinity of 13th century nutrition. You sit by the fire, slurping thoughtfully. The goat stands directly behind you and chews something unidentifiable. You don't question it. Some things are better left unknown. And then it's time for work. Now, you might think that owning goats means you just chill while they do the heavy lifting. That's adorable. No, you work for them. You are their full-time employee, unpaid, underappreciated, and one spilled bucket away from a nervous breakdown. Today, you're patching the fence. Again. Why? Because the mean one discovered she can fit through a particular gap between 2 crooked posts, escape into the neighbor's vegetable patch, eat his entire cabbage harvest, and come back looking innocent and bloated. That happened yesterday. There was yelling. There were accusations. You're pretty sure he hexed your onions. So now you're rebuilding the pen using sticks, twine, and despair. Your fingers are cold. Your toes are numb. Your tools consist of a mallet made from a rock tied to another rock and a knife that used to be sharp back when kings still bathed monthly. The goats watch you with interest. Not helpful interest. The kind of interest that says, "I will test this fence within the hour." You hammer harder. It's worth noting that your goat pen is more secure than your house. That's intentional. You've lost goats before. Once to wolves. Once to a thief. Once to what you hope was just very aggressive wind. Losing a goat is a catastrophic event, emotionally, economically, and socially. In this village, everything revolves around goats. They are currency. They are dowry. They are inheritance. Your child's future spouse may one day ask, "How many goats does your family own?" And the correct answer had better be more than one. Or else your grandchild will marry down, maybe even someone with just chickens. Chickens. The horror. While you repair the fence, you think back to your cousin's wedding, a festive event involving stale bread, 2 sad musicians, and an entire roasted goat. Not one of yours, of course. You contributed cheese. Your cousin was lucky. Her new husband came from a family of herders. They owned 7 goats. 7. That's like nobility around here. She's practically royalty. She has shoes. You've heard rumors of villages with dozens of goats organized into neat little rows and herded by professional handlers. This sounds fake. Like a dream. Like stories parents tell to keep kids from crying over dinner porridge. But still, you wonder. Maybe somewhere out there, someone is warm, full, and respected just because of goats. Back in reality, you wipe sweat from your brow and admire your finished fence. It's crooked. It leans. But it holds. For now. The goats immediately try to escape. You scream into the wind. Time passes. The sun climbs. The village hums with soft activity. You see someone chopping firewood, a child trying to mount a sheep, and 2 men arguing loudly about whether their goat cheese tastes more like ash or regret. You mind your business. At midday, you sit for lunch. It's the same as breakfast, only slightly warmer and featuring less optimism. You eat beside your goats, who crunch on withered grass and pretend not to notice your existence. You consider eating grass too. You decide against it. For now. In the afternoon, it's time for social obligations. There's a gathering in the village square, and by square, we mean a vaguely rectangular patch of churned-up mud between 4 buildings that are technically standing. A local monk is reading something from a scroll, probably involving sin, or taxes, or both. You don't care. You're here for the gossip. And the goat parade. Yes. The village holds a monthly goat parade. It's not official. No one organizes it. It just happens. People bring their goats to show off whose coat is shiniest, whose milk is creamiest, whose horns are longest. It's a popularity contest disguised as agriculture. You bring yours. Of course you do. You've cleaned them as much as possible, brushed their coats, removed visible ticks, and even braided a bit of straw around the nice one's neck for flair. The mean one bit you during grooming. You're still bleeding. The crowd murmurs appreciatively as one goat walks by wearing bells. Someone has dyed their goat's horns with crushed berries. Another child proudly announces that her goat once headbutted a tax collector. Applause. Your goats do not win. They do not even place. The mean one headbutts a toddler. You leave early. But still, you're proud. You have goats. And for all your daily misery, your endless toil, your lack of spices and sleep, you are part of something ancient. Something vital. Something 4-legged and stubborn. You end the day with more chores. Always more chores. You boil water for cleaning, scrub the milking bowl, patch the roof again, and fix the door hinge that came loose when a goat used it as a scratching post. You shovel more manure. So much manure. You wonder if it's multiplying on its own. You stop wondering. You accept it. Dinner is porridge. Again. You add a pinch of dried leek for excitement. It doesn't help. The goats settle in beside you, chewing slowly, eyes half-lidded. The fire crackles softly. The roof leaks slightly. Your feet itch. You sigh. Tomorrow will be the same. Wake. Milk. Feed. Repair. Yell. Graze. Eat. Sleep. But it's enough. You have your goats. And they, begrudgingly, indifferently, suspiciously, have you. It's raining. Again. You wake up to the soft, rhythmic percussion of water slapping thatch. It's a sound you used to find comforting back when you were naive, hopeful, and dry. Now it's just the soundtrack to another day of squelching through mud, trying to convince goats not to stand on things they shouldn't. The goat is in the house again. Somehow, you don't remember letting her in. You don't remember anyone letting her in. But there she is, staring at the wall like she knows something you don't. You sigh and try to sit up, but she's lying on your leg. It's warm, heavy, smells like hay and indignity. You shove her gently. She farts. You pause. She does not move. You shove her again, harder this time. She finally stands, shaking herself off in a flurry of dried grass and mysterious particles. Something lands in your porridge bowl from last night. You pretend not to notice. You pretend you're somewhere else. You pretend this is normal. Because it is. Outside, the mud is deeper than you remember. The kind of mud that has intentions. Sticky, slurping, grabby mud that yanks your foot down and makes a wet noise when you pull it back out. You consider turning around and declaring the day canceled. Unfortunately, goats don't care about weather. Goats love rain. Not in the joyful, frolic through the meadow sense. More like, let's climb slippery rocks and scream about our emotions while chewing bark. And so, you march on. Your tunic is already damp. Your socks are a myth. You've accepted that you will never be dry again. As you walk toward the pen, the goats greet you with enthusiastic bleating. Not because they're happy to see you, but because you are late. And goats, despite their vacant stares and perpetual chewing, are very aware of your schedule. Deviate by more than 5 minutes, and you'll be subjected to a full auditory critique of your management style. You throw open the gate. 3 goats rush past you in a blur of fur and judgment. One brushes against your leg and leaves behind a trail of wet. The mean one pauses just long enough to sneeze directly on your boot. Then they scatter into the mist like furry goblins unleashed. You chase them. You always chase them. This is your cardio. There's no gym membership. No yoga studio. Just the ancient art of sprinting after creatures who very deliberately run in opposite directions the moment you try to round them up. Today's chase ends in a neighbor's garden, or what used to be a garden before 3 goats rearranged it into a mud crater filled with hoof prints and shredded kale. The neighbor appears in the doorway, arms crossed, mouth tight. You promise to bring cheese. He doesn't respond. You consider adding a loaf of bread to sweeten the deal. You also consider faking your death and moving to the next village over. Back home, you tie the goats to a post while you attempt repairs on the cheese shed. Yes, you have a cheese shed. Or rather, a structure made of shame and splinters where you occasionally pretend to store cheese. It has a door that doesn't close, a roof that mostly leaks onto the cheese, and a mysterious smell you've stopped investigating. But it's important. Because cheese, particularly goat cheese, is your only real ticket to social mobility. It's the closest thing you have to a luxury good. Sure, your roof is caving in and your knees creak like a shipwreck, but if you can show up to the next village feast with 2 rounds of semi-soft aged goat cheese wrapped in cloth, you will be treated like a visiting baron. So you patch the holes. Again. With mud, sticks, and prayer. You check on the wheels of aging cheese inside. One has mold. Not the good kind. The other has teeth marks. Suspiciously goat-shaped ones. You sigh. This would be a great time to pause and reflect on your life choices, but there's no time. The goats are already yanking at their tethers, trying to eat a fence post and or escape into the forest. So you feed them instead. Feeding goats in a medieval village is a full-time art form. You must balance hay, wild greens, mystery twigs, and whatever scraps you can scrounge without starting a turf war with the pigs. If you feed them too little, they scream. If you feed them too much, they scream louder and then demand seconds. If you feed them last, after the chickens, they riot. You toss some wilted cabbage their way. The nice one eats slowly. The mean one snatches it, looks you in the eye, and drops it on the ground. There is no winning. But still, the milk is good. Warm, rich, slightly grassy. You use it to make your 3rd porridge of the day. This time, you add honey. A luxury. A bribe from the beekeeper in exchange for goat dung to smoke out his hive. You don't ask questions. Barter is weird. As you eat, you watch the goats nap. It's unfair, really, how peaceful they look, curled up in the straw, legs tucked under, eyes half closed in contentment. As if they haven't spent the entire morning waging psychological warfare on your sanity. One twitches in her sleep. You hope she's dreaming of fences she can't escape. Afternoon rolls in with more clouds and a gust of wind that carries the familiar scent of chic, which means visitors. A shepherd from a nearby hamlet arrives, trudging through the muck with 2 sheep in tow and a satchel full of news. His tunic is nicer than yours, which annoys you. He greets you with the traditional nod and grunt. You respond with a grunt and a nod. Ceremony complete. He wants to trade. Specifically, he wants goat milk, says his ewes aren't producing, and his wife's been eyeing your cheese with envy. You feel flattered, then suspicious, then flattered again. He offers a sack of barley and a wool cap. You pretend to think it over, knowing full well you'll agree. You need the barley. You want the cap. Your ears are tired of frostbite. Trade complete. He sits beside you on a stump, chewing a bit of something unidentifiable and telling stories about wolves in the hills and how the last frost froze a chicken mid-strut. You laugh politely. You've heard better from your goats. As the sun dips, the shepherd leaves, and you prepare for evening. This means more fencing. Always fencing. The goats have discovered a new escape route through a hole you swear wasn't there this morning. You suspect sabotage. Possibly organized. You patch it with thorny branches, bits of discarded shoe leather, and whatever's left of your patience. Then you go looking for firewood. Firewood, this time of year, is less wood and more moist sadness shaped like a stick. You gather what you can. It's never enough. You dream of a time when you could just turn a knob, light a match, whisper Alexa, make fire. But no. You rub damp twigs together like a confused raccoon and hope the smoke gods show mercy. Your fire sputters. Your stew simmers. Your goat, somehow, has eaten half of your firewood pile. You don't ask how. You don't ask why. You just make a note to store it higher next time. You won't, but you pretend you will. Night settles in. You sit in the dim glow of the fire, chewing slowly, listening to the distant sounds of village life, the cluck of a late chicken, the snap of a twig, the familiar yowl of someone stepping in something unspeakable. You look at your goats. They look back. And in that quiet, flickering moment, with your belly half full, your fire barely alive, and your dignity leaking out through a drafty wall, you realize something strange. You're content. Not happy. Let's not get ridiculous. But there is a strange peace to the rhythm of it all. The rising, the feeding, the chasing, the bleeding, the stink. The constant, exhausting chaos of keeping these infuriating animals alive, because they keep you alive. They give milk. They give warmth. They give status. And every so often, when they nuzzle your hand or flop down in your lap like living sacks of grump, they give comfort. The mean one sneezes directly onto your soup. You take it as a compliment. And so, as the fire dies low and the goats nestle into the straw, you lie back, arms behind your head, staring up at a ceiling held together by dreams and mildew. Tomorrow will be the same. And the day after that. And the day after that. But you have goats. And for reasons you still don't fully understand, that's enough. You wake up to chewing. Not the satisfying, rhythmic chewing of a calm animal digesting responsibly. No. This is the loud, uneven, chaos chewing of a goat who has found something she definitely should not be chewing. You sit up too fast and bang your head on the wooden beam above your sleeping mat, a sacred medieval ritual known as the dawn concussion. You squint into the murky gray of early morning. There she is, standing triumphantly in the corner, chewing something that was, until yesterday, the hem of your only cloak. Her eyes meet yours, blank yet defiant. She pauses, then continues chewing, as if to say, "This is my house now." And honestly, she's not wrong. You drag yourself up, bones crackling like firewood. Your joints sound older than the village priest. The air is cold. Your breath hangs in the room like a ghost of poor decisions. You consider going back to sleep, but the goat has now moved on to a basket of onions. You get up. Breakfast is an aspirational term in your world. There is no bacon, no eggs, no toasted sourdough with basil oil. There's porridge again. Always porridge. You stir it with a stick that once had other uses, but has now been demoted to general mush duty. You add a splash of goat's milk, because it's the only culinary luxury you have, and technically it's payment for all the cloak eating. It tastes okay. Kind of like oats mixed with depression and a hint of barn. You eat it anyway. Then you set out for the morning milking. Milking goats is a spiritual experience. By spiritual, we mean that it involves patience, suffering, and a regular need to ask invisible forces for help. The goats aren't thrilled either. They shuffle. They fidget. They kick the pail just as it starts to fill. The mean one waits until you relax and then leans directly on your face. It's fine. You didn't need dignity this morning. After several minutes of coaxing, humming, and soft threats, you manage to get a respectable amount of milk. Enough for cheese. Maybe enough for trade. Definitely not enough for the number of curses your back is now whispering into your spine. You store the milk in a clay pot, one of your prized possessions. It's chipped and smells vaguely like regret, but it's yours. You place it near the hearth, which hasn't been properly warm in weeks, but you pretend anyway. Then you check the fence. Again. You check the fence at least twice a day, sometimes 3, because your goats are escape artists disguised as livestock. Today, the fence is still standing. Mostly. One side has been redesigned by something with horns and poor impulse control. You patch it with sticks, leftover rope, and the last shreds of your self-respect. The nice goat watches, helpfully. The mean one tries to eat the rope. You spend the rest of the morning gathering forage. This is not a glamorous task. You crawl through hedges, dig up roots, and occasionally argue with a goose over ownership of a dandelion patch. You carry the bundle home in a sack that once held turnips, and now holds whatever will keep your goats from dismantling your walls out of boredom. You pause, halfway home, to breathe, to stare at the distant hills, to reflect on the absolute absurdity of your life. You raise goats, for survival, for trade, for milk, for reasons unclear to even yourself. You could have been a monk, a carpenter, a poet. Instead, you spend your days scooping dung and explaining to your animals why they can't live inside the flour bin. But there's a strange piece to it, a rhythm. The village is quiet today, just the distant clink of a blacksmith, the muffled yells of children trying to turn mud into architecture, and the low hum of wind through bare trees. You return to the pen. The goats have found something to climb. They always do. You're not sure where they got it, possibly your firewood pile, possibly part of the shed. But they're up there now, triumphant and bleeding like ancient gods on Mount Annoyance. You lure them down with stale bread crusts and the power of suggestion. Midday arrives. You eat more porridge. You add salt this time. It changes nothing. Then it's time to clean the pen. Cleaning a medieval goat pen is not glamorous. There are no gloves, no hoses, no helpful chemical sprays. There is a shovel, a bucket, and a strong nose blindness developed over years of exposure. You scrape, scoop, and swear under your breath. The smell is biblical. The flies are enthusiastic. You find something unidentifiable and quietly decide to ignore it. The waste goes into the compost pit, which is just a fancy way of saying a hole where the smell goes to relax. But it's useful. Goat dung is excellent fertilizer. Not glamorous. Not pretty. But crucial. The same stuff that ruins your shoes also grows your vegetables. There's a life lesson in there somewhere. You ignore it. After cleaning, you rest. You sit on a log. You stare at the sky. You watch clouds drift past like giant sheep fleeing responsibility. The goats nap nearby, twitching occasionally, dreaming goat dreams. You remember something your neighbor once said: goats are like people, stubborn, loud, and always hungry. You thought it was funny at the time. Now you just think it's accurate. Afternoon chores begin. You repair a bucket. Again. The handle broke last week, and your last attempt at fixing it involved twine, beeswax, and creative swearing. Today you try leather strips. It mostly works. You celebrate by hauling water from the well and spilling only half of it on your tunic. Then you notice the goat, standing inside your garden, eating a beet. You drop the bucket. You yell. The goat runs, not away, but in a perfect circle, as if mocking the very concept of order. You chase her through mud, past chickens, over a log, and finally back into the pen. You collapse, breathless. She looks at you, blinks, begins chewing the hem of your tunic. You don't stop her. At this point, clothing is optional and mostly symbolic. Evening comes. Again. With it, the cold. You light a fire. You make soup from wilted leeks and something that might be a turnip. You add goat milk. Always goat milk. It thickens the broth, adds depth, reminds you that you are not entirely alone in this miserable, beautiful world. You sip. Slowly. You close your eyes. The goat farts. You keep sipping. Outside, the village begins to sleep. Fires dim. Doors close. The air grows still, except for the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of something in the straw that you pray is not a rat. You lay down. The goat curls up beside you. The nice one. The mean one is outside, plotting. You stare at the ceiling. You think about your goats, how annoying, how chaotic, how vital they are. They are your livelihood, your food, your barter, your occasional source of warmth. And yes, your tormentors. But also, your weird, stubborn companions in this endless, muddy struggle known as daily existence. You drift off to sleep, surrounded by the smells of hay, goat, and faintly scorched porridge. The fire crackles. The wind moans. A goat snorts in her sleep. And you, somehow, despite everything, feel safe. Because you have goats. And goats, for all their crimes, have you. You wake up before dawn. Again. Because it's market day. You're not excited, exactly. But it is the closest thing to adventure you'll ever know. Your version of a vacation. A little slice of chaos baked fresh every 7 days and served with a side of pickpockets and root vegetables. You roll out of bed, stiff as a cathedral gargoyle. Your knees make the same sound as your door hinges. The goat is already awake, staring at you like a tiny, hairy debt collector. You nod. She nods back. You both understand, today will require effort. You dress in your finest. By finest, of course, we mean your least stained tunic. You shake out the straw, wipe off the worst of the mystery smears, and find a cloak with only 2 patches instead of 5. You even comb your hair, with your fingers, because combs are for nobility and rich widows. Then you prepare your offerings. This week, you're bringing a small block of goat cheese, aged for exactly too long. 3 clay jars of goat milk, sealed with beeswax and desperation. 1 goat hide, from the goat who kicked you one too many times. A tangle of wool scraps, questionably clean. And, of course, your nicest goat. You lead her with a rope halter and false confidence. She doesn't want to go. She plants her hooves, glares at you, and resists like a furry anchor. You whisper promises of leftover bread crusts. She is unimpressed. Eventually, she moves. You begin the walk to market, 3 miles of squelching mud, shifting stones, and judgmental crows. The goat tries to eat a bush, a rock, and the sleeve of a passing monk. You apologize profusely. The monk says nothing, because he's taken a vow of silence, but his eyes say everything. You arrive at the village green just as the stalls are being set up. The market smells like hope, rot, and overcooked onions. You claim your usual spot, halfway between the blacksmith's apprentice who sells horseshoes and has a persistent cough, and a woman who sells medicinal herbs that suspiciously resemble weeds. You spread out your wares on a cloth that used to be your grandmother's table linen, but now lives a harder life. You sit and wait. You smile at passers-by in that strained, desperate way all peasant merchants do, equal parts welcoming and please don't haggle, I haven't eaten since Tuesday. A man approaches. He picks up the cheese, sniffs it, frowns. You explain that it's aged just right, with notes of wildflower and cave dampness. He asks if it's supposed to have that color. You say yes. He says no. He leaves. Next, a child points at your goat and asks if it's a dog. You say no. She asks if she can ride it. You say absolutely not. She tries anyway. The goat kicks over your milk jars. The mother apologizes by blinking slowly and walking away. It's fine. You love market day. The hours pass. You sell 1 jar of milk to a woman who pays in eggs. You trade the wool scraps for a single onion. You sell the goat hide to the tanner for a silver penny, which is bent, tarnished, and possibly fake, but it's still the most silver you've seen all month. You eat a boiled dumpling from the food cart, if dumpling can mean slightly warm wad of dough that tastes like wet ash. It costs you a slice of cheese and your last nerve. Then the town crier shows up. He rings his bell. He yells about taxes. He yells about plague. He yells about a missing pig. You nod respectfully. You wonder if the pig left on purpose. Later, the priest walks by and gives you a solemn nod. You nod back, then remember you forgot to go to church again. You quietly pretend you have goat-related religious exemptions. He pretends not to notice. You chat with other merchants, fellow goat enthusiasts and livestock lunatics. One man insists his goat once fought off a wolf. Another swears he has a goat that can count. You share your own story, the time your goat chewed through a fence, escaped, got pregnant, and came back 6 days later with a smug look and someone else's boot. They're impressed. Or horrified. It's hard to tell. A young woman asks if you'll breed your goat with hers. You consider it. You ask to see her goat. She brings over a beast so surly it makes your mean goat look like a kitten. You politely decline. She curses in 3 languages and storms off. You sip warm ale from a cracked mug. It tastes like liquid bread and poor decisions. You watch the sky turn gold. The market begins to empty. Stall by stall, the merchants pack up. The blacksmith's apprentice coughs dramatically and leaves. The herbalist offers you a healing tincture in exchange for milk. You give her the milk and pour the tincture into a ditch when she's not looking. It's time to go. You pack what little remains. Your goat, miraculously, hasn't run off, though she has eaten part of your display cloth and now smells faintly of mint. You begin the walk home. It's darker now. The path is quiet, except for the slosh of mud and the faint bleating of your goat telling you she's tired, despite doing none of the work. You reach home just as the stars emerge. You unload your things. You feed the goat. You light the hearth. You sit. The market didn't make you rich. It never does. But you have enough, some food, some trade goods, some stories. You survived. Again. You look at the goat. She looks at you. You both nod. Tomorrow, the grind continues, feeding, milking, cleaning, arguing over fence logistics. But tonight, you rest. You stretch out on your straw mat. The goat lies down nearby, making soft chewing sounds in her sleep. The fire crackles. The wind hums against the shutters. Somewhere, a wolf howls. You ignore it. You close your eyes. And you dream, not of riches or castles or soft pillows, but of a market where everyone pays in silver and no one asks if your cheese is supposed to smell like that. And in the dream, your goat behaves. Sort of. You wake up coughing. Because the roof leaks. Again. There's a drip, drip, drip somewhere in the corner. It's been dripping for 3 nights now. You've tried plugging it with wool, straw, old bread, and spiritual resignation. It still drips. You've named it. Gerald. Gerald the leak. Your throat is sore. Your nose is not so much running as it is casually leaking, like a wine cask with a grudge. It's official, you're sick. Not deathbed sick. Not dramatic enough for a priest and a handwritten will. Just the regular kind. The peasant kind. Achy, crusty, inconveniently timed and deeply unimpressive. You sigh. Then you sneeze, hard enough to frighten the goat sleeping nearby. She jumps up, stares at you, and sneezes back. Possibly in solidarity. Possibly in protest. And so, your day begins, 2 sick mammals, 1 cold fire, and a growing awareness that your joints have filed a formal complaint. You need medicine. But, and this is important, you live in the 1300s. So medicine is a loose term. A suggestion. A roll of the dice with a goat's hoof and half a clove of garlic. You rummage through your house, a box of dried nettles, a jar of something that might be honey but also might be fermented despair, and a bundle of herbs you forgot to label last spring. You boil water. You drop the mystery herbs in. You drink. It tastes like hay tea and disappointment. You sneeze again. You consider going to the village healer. She's 70 years old, wears 11 scarves at once, and claims to be descended from druids. She also once told you to rub goat spit on a rash, so you're a little hesitant. Still, you go. You shuffle to her hut, hunched, sniffling, and deeply aware of your own mortality. The goat follows you. Of course she does. She senses weakness. The healer opens the door before you knock. She always does that. It's either magic or she watches through a knothole in the wall. She sniffs you. Literally. Then nods and says, "Aha, lung rot." You ask what that means. She shrugs. You'll probably live. Comforting. She begins rummaging through baskets, jars, pouches made of questionable materials. You sit on a 3-legged stool that collapses halfway through your sneeze. The goat tries to eat a scroll. Eventually, She hands you a foul-smelling poultice and a small bottle filled with something green and viscous. She tells you to rub the poultice on your chest and drink the green stuff only after whispering your name into it at sunrise. You don't ask questions. You just nod and pay her with goat milk and a single dried apple. She's delighted. On your way out, she calls after you, and don't forget the goat. You stop. Turn. The goat, you ask, wheezing. Yes, she says, pulling a large book from the shelf. Goats are sacred. Also therapeutic. Especially the left kidney. You blink. She flips the book open, a worn, greasy tome filled with scribbled Latin and the occasional diagram that looks like it was drawn by a sleep-deprived monk with a personal vendetta against anatomy. She reads, "For fever, one must place the warm belly of a goat upon the forehead." You consider asking follow-up questions, but you don't. Because this is medieval medicine. In fact, goats show up in more medical texts than you'd expect. Pliny the Elder, a Roman who somehow survived long enough to write dozens of scrolls without dying from his own advice, suggested goat dung as a treatment for nosebleeds. Just stuff it up there. Problem solved. Problem created? Who's to say? In the 12th century, the Trotula, a set of medical texts written, possibly, by a woman, suggested goat's milk with mint and rosewater as a treatment for female ailments. No one's entirely sure what that meant. Possibly cramps. Possibly the fact that women existed. Another recipe? Mix goat bile with honey. Drink it. For something. Probably not joy. Your neighbor once told you that sleeping with a baby goat in the bed helps joint pain. You tried it. You woke up sore, covered in fur, and missing a button. Some monks swore that burning goat hair and inhaling the smoke cured melancholy. Other monks said that just meant you were choking. But the real showstopper? Goat urine. Yes, goat urine. According to one 13th century physician, warm goat pee cured toothaches. You were supposed to hold it in your mouth for as long as you could, possibly forever. There's no clear end point. You think about this while walking home. You think about how much of medicine was just very confident guessing. How most remedies were a mix of plants, prayer, and the willingness to rub things on your skin that absolutely should not be rubbed on skin. At home, you do your best. You smear the healer's poultice on your chest. It smells like vinegar and swamp. The goat watches, judging. Then, against your better instincts, you lie down and attempt the goat belly on forehead treatment. The goat does not cooperate. She flails. She bleats. She knocks over a bowl. You try to reason with her. She responds by farting and stepping on your neck. You abandon the procedure. Instead, you wrap yourself in your cloak, sip hot nettle tea, and let your body do the real work, lying very still and hoping you don't die. In the medieval world, that's about as advanced as medicine gets. Some people get leeches. Others get prayers. You get goat-themed aromatherapy and a strong immune system shaped by years of exposure to barn bacteria. You drift in and out of sleep. You dream of goat doctors, small, hoof creatures in long robes, holding herbs in their mouths and writing prescriptions by stomping on parchment. You wake up coughing. The goat is curled next to you. Warm. Breathing slow. Peaceful. You reach out. Rest your hand on her back. Feel her breath. Feel your own lungs easing. Maybe it's the poultice. Maybe it's the tea. Maybe it's the sheer stubbornness of someone who has survived 17 winters, 2 food shortages, and that time you got kicked in the jaw by a cow named Mildred. Whatever it is, it's working. You feel slightly better. Not good. Never good. But better. You stare at the ceiling. Count the cobwebs. Listen to the wind rattle the shutters. Feel your breath moving easier now. No goat urine required. You smile. Because despite the filth, the cold, the questionable medical advice, and the absolute goat-centered chaos of your life, you're healing. And tomorrow, if you're lucky, you'll wake up and only sneeze once. Progress. You wake up in church. Not because you're devout. Because it's freezing outside, and the chapel is the only building in the village with stone walls and a fire pit that doesn't double as a goat birthing station. The priest hasn't noticed you snuck in. He's busy preparing for Mass, adjusting his robes, muttering Latin, and looking like he hasn't slept since last Lent. A choirboy sweeps the floor with a bundle of twigs. Another kid is trying to keep a candle from tipping over. He's losing. You sit quietly in the back pew. It's hard. Wooden. The splinters are holy. Outside, the wind howls like a banshee with tax problems. Inside, it's only slightly warmer. You pull your cloak tighter and glance around the nave. You're not the only one here early. There's old Marjorie, who comes to every service just to glare at the younger women. There's the baker, who once gave you a communion wafer that tasted suspiciously like leftover pie crust. And there's a goat. Yes, a goat, tied near the altar, chewing solemnly on a hymn book. You blink. Rub your eyes. Look again. Still there. You sigh, because of course. Because goats, in this century, are everywhere, even in sacred spaces. Especially in sacred spaces. You close your eyes and try to rest, but your brain has other ideas. It begins reviewing everything you've ever been told about goats and religion. Spoiler, it's not comforting. In fact, it's weird. Let's begin with the obvious. Goats have a complicated reputation in Christian Europe. On one hoof, they're useful. They provide milk, meat, hides, companionship, and the occasional tragicomic story about falling into a well. On the other hoof, they're kind of theologically sketchy. Because somewhere along the line, medieval people decided that goats, those shaggy, sneaky, sideways-eyed creatures, might be a little too wild. A little too unpredictable. A little too devilish. Yes, devilish. You see, goats had the misfortune of looking like the devil's favorite cryptid. Horns? Check. Beady eyes? Check. Hooves? Check. A suspicious beard and an attitude problem? Double check. And so, over time, goats got roped into the growing medieval panic over heresy, witchcraft, and anything that didn't smell like incense or feudalism. You remember the priest's sermon last week. He said goats represented the unrighteous in Scripture. He quoted Matthew 25, "He shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left." Left being the bad side, the sinful side, the you definitely forgot to tie side. You looked down at your tunic, stitched with goat hair. You looked at your shoes, made of goat hide. You looked at your hands, calloused from milking goats twice a day since you were old enough to stand. So basically, you were the living embodiment of biblical disappointment. Cool. But it goes deeper. In some parts of Europe, peasants believed that Satan actually took the form of a black goat, or that witches could transform into goats, or, and this is a real crowd pleaser, that witches rode goats to their secret Sabbaths in the woods, where they danced, cursed crops, and probably talked politics. And so, goats became not just livestock, but suspects. There are records of goats being put on trial. You've heard the stories. A goat in France was executed for unnatural acts. A goat in Switzerland was accused of conspiring with a heretic. In both cases, the goats were found guilty. No lawyer. No appeal. Just a very confused animal and a judge with too much free time. You once asked the village priest why God made goats if they were so suspect. He gave a long sigh and said, "For balance." You're not sure what that means. Possibly something poetic. Possibly a spiritual shrug. Still, not everything about goats and religion is negative. In some traditions, goats were linked to sacrifice, not in the burn it and run way, but in a deeply symbolic, almost noble way. In Jewish tradition, the concept of the scapegoat came from Yom Kippur, when a goat symbolically bore the sins of the people and was sent into the wilderness. Medieval Christians twisted that idea into something darker, but the roots are older and more solemn. You remember a traveling preacher who once claimed goats had eyes that see sin. You found that deeply unsettling, especially since your goat once stared at you for a full hour after you dropped a communion wafer. Some villagers take the goat stare as a kind of confession. They tell their sins to their goats. You tried it once. Told her about that time you faked sick to avoid threshing day. She blinked, sneezed, ate a spoon. Maybe that was absolution. But despite the spiritual baggage, goats still ended up everywhere, in artwork, in churchyards, in parables. You once saw a stained glass window featuring a lamb, a lion, and what looked like a goat being slightly ignored. And in folk Christianity, people found ways to coexist with the symbolism. Some families blessed their goats with holy water in the spring. Some braided crosses into the goat's fur. Some carved tiny crucifixes and tied them to the goat's horns, just in case the devil tried to borrow it. And, Of course, goats were frequent victims of religious festivals. You've been to one. The Feast of St. Myrthan, or maybe it was St. Gutwin, a lesser-known martyr who, according to legend, converted a goat by preaching to it for 7 days straight. At the feast, they parade a goat through the village, cover it in garlands, and then, depending on the region, either bless it or roast it. Sometimes both. Last year, the parade goat escaped midway through the procession, ran straight into the blacksmith's yard and kicked over a bucket of nails. The priest said it was possessed. You said it was understandably upset. He didn't laugh. But in your heart, you've always believed that goats are not evil, just misunderstood. They're not devilish, just dramatic, not sinful, just stubborn, like people. After all, who among us hasn't eaten a curtain or chewed a sandal out of boredom? You glance toward the altar. The goat is still there, still chewing the hymn book. You rise quietly and walk over. Untie her. Lead her gently outside before anyone notices. She follows willingly. She's had enough religion for one morning. You bring her back to your hut. Give her some oats. Scratch behind her ears. She leans against you. And in that moment, damp, slightly itchy, vaguely heretical, you feel something close to peace. Maybe goats aren't sacred. Maybe they aren't cursed. Maybe they're just present. Always here. In the mud. In the hay. In the weird corners of scripture and folklore and dreams. Maybe that's enough. You close your eyes. And you dream of a world where the goats are never blamed, never burned, never tied to altars and accused of witchcraft. A world where goats wear tiny robes and give sermons about grass. A world where you are not the village goat person, but the goat priest. And everyone listens. Even the sheep. You wake up to shouting. Not rooster crowing, not baby crying, not your goat stepped on your face again shouting. This is feud shouting. The kind that rattles shutters and makes the chickens nervous. You sit up slowly. Stretch. Rub the sleep from your eyes. Your shoulder clicks in protest, a sharp reminder that straw mattresses age about as well as bread in the rain. Outside, two voices rise in pitch and volume. One of them is unmistakably your neighbor, Edwin. The other is, well, everyone else. You shuffle to the door. Open it. Squint into the morning sun, which is doing its usual job of looking holy and judgmental. And there, in the center of the village square, is your goat, standing proudly on top of Edwin's table, eating what appears to be a ceremonial cabbage. You sigh. Again, you trudge barefoot across the mud. The village dogs clear a path. A small child points at you and says, he's the goat one. You are. Edwin is red in the face, puffing like a bellows, waving his arms with the wild rhythm of a man who's rehearsed this tantrum in the mirror many, many times. She's done it again, he roars, gesturing at your goat. This is the third time this month. Your goat chews slowly, thoughtfully, unapologetically. You glance at the table. It's covered in bits of cloth, turnip tops, and one very violated cabbage. It was supposed to be the centerpiece for Edwin's feast, celebrating the arrival of his cousin from Flanders, a man known only as Flemmy Tom. The cabbage was symbolic. Now it's salad. You apologize, of course. You always do. Edwin doesn't hear you. He's too busy listing your goat's crimes, like a medieval grocery list written in fury. Chewed through my thatch. Scared my hens. Looked at my wife like that. You aren't sure what that means. But the goat does have an expression that suggests moral superiority and possible insurance fraud. Someone suggests a fine. Someone else suggests roasting. A third person suggests exile, but no one's quite sure if they mean for you or the goat. You try to wrangle her off the table. She hops down on her own, lands in Edwin's soup pot, and walks away like she owns the place. You follow, head bowed, trying to keep the peace, trying to avoid the inevitable. But you know. Deep in your goat-haunted soul, you know. The feud has begun. Not a friendly disagreement. Not a he said, goat said misunderstanding. A true feud. The medieval kind. And that, dear sleeper, is not a small thing. Because in a medieval village, a feud is as sacred as marriage and twice as durable. It's a social ecosystem. A tangled, unwritten contract made of memory, gossip, and passive-aggressive bread offerings. And goat-based feuds? Oh, they're the best kind. Because goats are experts in causing trouble without technically breaking laws. They find loopholes. They exploit weaknesses. They will eat your dignity and look you in the eye while doing it. So let's talk about how a goat feud unfolds. It always starts with trespassing. Goats don't care about fences. Fences are suggestions. A polite "please stay out" written in sticks. To a goat, every gate is a challenge. Every garden is an all-you-can-eat buffet guarded by slow bipeds. Your goat, like most goats, has no respect for private property. She has eaten Edwin's vegetables, Marjorie's laundry, the thatch off the blacksmith's roof, the parish register once, and, famously, the lower hem of the priest's cassock during last winter's sermon on temptation. But this time she crossed a line. She ate a feast cabbage, which, in Edwin's world, is basically eating his dreams. So now, Edwin won't speak to you directly. He speaks about you, loudly, within earshot, at every opportunity. In the bakery, some people don't teach their animals manners. At church, some creatures have no respect for the Lord's produce. At funerals, she was a good woman, didn't let goats on the furniture. You try to apologize again. You offer cheese. He says he doesn't eat dairy tainted by wickedness. You offer to help mend his fence. He says only God can mend a broken soul. Eventually, you stop trying. You accept the feud. And that's when it really begins. Edwin starts petty retaliation. Classic moves. He sprinkles sawdust near your doorway to make it look like your roof is shedding. He claims he saw your goat consorting with a rooster in an ungodly fashion. He trains his grandchild to make goat noises whenever you walk past. It escalates. You retaliate by accidentally stacking your firewood against his pigpen wall. You forget to mention that his favorite mug was found in your goat's bedding. You make a subtle comment at the well about how some people use too much lard for someone with such thin soup. The village loves it. Nothing spices up rural life like a good, slow-burning feud. People take sides, make bets, host weekly story circles just to retell your goat's crimes with increasing exaggeration. And then come the formal complaints. Edwin petitions the reeve, the village official, who mostly exists to look tired and write down your misfortunes in a large, muddy ledger. The reeve holds a meeting. You attend. Edwin presents evidence: chewed herbs, goat prints in the cabbage mud, a sermon the priest never finished because of chewing sounds. You present counterarguments: goats have rights, she's not even that literate, and let he who is without goat poop on his shoes cast the first stone. The reeve sighs. Rules in favor of reconciliation. You must share a feast, together, with goat present, as a symbol of peace. You agree. The feast is held in the village square. Edwin cooks soup. You provide cheese. The goat provides ambience by refusing to sit still and stealing a meat pie. There is tense silence. Then Edwin's wife makes a joke about goats being better listeners than husbands. People laugh. You raise a mug. Edwin raises one too. Your goat sneezes directly into the pot. And somehow, that breaks the tension. Edwin laughs. You laugh. The goat laughs. Well, she makes a noise that sounds like laughter, then headbutts a barrel. Peace, for now. But the memory remains. Because medieval life is built on memory, on grudges and gossip, and that time a goat ate an entire wedding veil and pooped in the baptismal font. You go to bed that night smiling. Because the feud may be over, but the legend has begun. And in this tiny village, where news moves slower than mildew, you are now folklore. You, and your infamous, cabbage-eating, sermon-ruining, goat-shaped legacy. You drift into sleep to the sound of her hooves on the floorboards. You dream of tribunals, turnips, and a cabbage growing so large it becomes mayor. You sleep well, because tomorrow is a new day, and someone else's goat will cause trouble. And you, finally, will get to watch from a safe distance, sipping tea and muttering, "Well, at least it wasn't mine." You wake up cold. And not the fun kind of cold, like refreshing lake dip after a sweaty harvest. No, this is the kind of cold that crawls up your nightshirt, nestles between your shoulder blades, and whispers, "You left the stable door open." It's midwinter. The fire's out. Your breath hangs in the air. Your toes feel like sausages left out in a frost fair. And your goat, your beloved, stubborn, frost-proof goat, is lying directly on top of your cloak, looking smug and completely unbothered by the icy apocalypse that has descended upon your life. Welcome to January. In the medieval world, January is not so much a month as it is an endurance test. It is 12 weeks long and also somehow only 3 days. The sun rises like a dim candle stub, makes a half-hearted attempt at cheerfulness, then goes home again by mid-afternoon. Most of your waking hours are spent sitting near the hearth, darning socks that already hate you, sipping weak ale, and pretending to enjoy turnips. Your goat, meanwhile, is having a fantastic time. Why? Because she has a built-in sweater. She doesn't have to go to confession. And she's already stolen your best pair of mittens and is currently eating one under the table. Daily routine is sluggish in winter. You check the goats for frostbite, which they always seem to avoid. You check yourself for frostbite, which you don't. The water trough is frozen. The manure pile is frozen. Your soul is not great. But goats? Goats are built for this. Their hooves crunch merrily through the icy hay. Their breath fogs in elegant little clouds. They somehow look better in cold weather, like they've just returned from a Nordic spa retreat, while you look like someone who's been storing potatoes in your own eye sockets. Still, winter has its rituals. Feeding time, water hauling, occasional hoof trimming. Goat care becomes more intense now, more precious. Because this is survival mode. There's no lush grazing. You're on hay, kitchen scraps, and the memory of sunlight. And even the most antisocial goats suddenly want to cuddle. Or rather, they tolerate being near you, which is medieval affection at its peak. You spend evenings by firelight, spinning wool, mending harnesses, and quietly cursing the goat who keeps nudging your elbow every time you try to thread a needle. Outside, the fields lie barren. The world is hibernating. But slowly, the sun begins to stretch. And one morning, you wake up, and the goat, still lying on your cloak, opens one lazy eye, stands up, and sneezes so hard she knocks over your candlestick. It's spring, and everything changes. Suddenly, your entire village smells like wet soil, goat fur, and enthusiasm. People start talking again. Projects emerge. And the goats? The goats go absolutely feral. Spring means kidding season, which means you now have goat babies. Plural. Congratulations. You didn't ask for this, but the goat union never listens. Now, in addition to everything else, you're also a midwife, a babysitter, and a full-time goat herd because these baby goats have exactly one goal in life. Escape. They leap out of pens. They climb on barrels. They fall into buckets. They tangle themselves in ropes, thistles, and sometimes inexplicably your laundry line. They bleat at 3 a.m. like tiny wool-covered sirens. And somehow, even though you've slept 5 hours total this week, you're also weirdly happy. Because spring is alive, and your goats are thriving, and your neighbor Edwin finally admitted he found your last cheese surprisingly decent. You take the kids out to the common pastures. Let them stretch their ridiculous little legs. You watch them frolic. You remember that joy is a thing that can happen even without central heating or bacon. By late spring, the babies are weaned. Your adult goats are grazing long hours. And you, sweet, sleep-deprived, cheese-smelling you, are preparing for the chaos that is summer. Now, summer in a medieval village is not vacation. It's production season. You rise at dawn. You don't stop moving until the moon is over the outhouse. Every day is a jigsaw puzzle of haymaking, cheese pressing, vegetable weeding, and trying to keep your goat from becoming mayor of the village purely through intimidation. Summer means abundance. The goats are fat and sassy. Milk production is up. There's green everywhere, in the fields, in the gardens, and even, annoyingly, in your water buckets thanks to algae. It's a season of noise, buzzing flies, lowing cows, shrieking children, and the occasional horrifying crash as a goat knocks over your entire grain sack in pursuit of a single bean. You also spend more time with other villagers because everyone's outdoors, everyone's working, and the goats all somehow know how to coordinate poop placement for maximum public embarrassment. You host goat-related visitors. Local boys trying to trade for a buck. Traveling friars who want milk for the sick. The reeve who just wants to make sure nobody's grazing in the wrong place you are. You eat better, cheese, herbs, the occasional poached egg. You drink cooler, ale that hasn't been warmed by your own knees. You even bathe, once. Summer is exhausting, but it's beautiful, too. Long evenings. Stars. Singing. Your goats lying peacefully in the grass, dreaming of future chaos. But nothing lasts. Because soon, you wake up to mist. A chill in the air. A bucket that didn't quite freeze, but definitely wants to. You wrap your shawl tighter. You press your forehead against the goat's warm side for a second longer. It's autumn. And autumn is the beginning of the end. The goat's milk starts to slow. The pastures get thinner. Every leaf that falls is a reminder, winter is coming, and it is bringing homework. You harvest hay, vegetables, grain. You stack firewood with the desperation of a man who knows exactly how long a medieval night can last. Your goat watches all of this with smug detachment, chewing her cud like she's hosting a silent podcast called How I Survived Another Year Without Doing Taxes. You prep the barn, patch the thatch, dig root cellars, salt meat, smoke cheese. You count how many turnips you can eat before your spirit breaks. Answer: 4. 5 if they're in stew. And slowly, the village quiets again. The laughter dies down. The singing fades. The last outdoor feast is held under fading light. People trade extra goods, swap stories, make predictions. Your goat gets into the mead, climbs the table, and delivers a stunning performance of bleat and fall down. It's a hit. You go home. You close the shutters. And once again, you wake up cold. Winter has returned. And so has your goat, in your cloak, as always, chewing the corner of your pillow. You survived another year. A full medieval calendar, with a goat by your side. Through famine and feast, frost and folly. And what have you learned? That goats are chaos incarnate. That time is a circle made of hay. That survival is a group project, with goats doing their part by eating your map, your backup plan, and your best linen napkin. You close your eyes, listen to the soft bleating in the stable, and drift off. Because tomorrow starts the whole cycle again. And honestly, you're ready for it. You wake up to bells. Not alarm bells. Not goat bells. Church bells. Big, heavy, ecclesiastical bells that say, "Hey you." Yes, you with the matted hair and chronic trench foot. Get thee to Massachusetts. You yawn, stretch, hit your head on a beam, and mutter something you'll later have to confess. Your goat, naturally, is already awake and chewing on the end of your sleeve like it's made of sacred cheesecloth. It's Sunday morning, which means you're about to take your sinful, sleep-deprived self and your utterly godless goat straight into the heart of medieval religious life. Now, to be clear, everything in your world is religious. Rainstorms are religious. Cheese is religious. Birth, death, the weird mold on your neighbor's ear, all religious. And goats? Goats are deeply suspicious in the eyes of medieval theology. Not quite evil, but definitely on the spiritual watch list. Because as far back as the book of Leviticus, so we're talking Old Testament, Hebrew scroll, desert vibes, goats were used in atonement rituals. Enter the scapegoat. No, not the person in your office who always gets blamed for missed deadlines. The original scapegoat was a literal goat, chosen by ancient priests to carry the sins of the people out into the wilderness. Symbolically, of course. The goat itself didn't write a memoir or go into therapy. Fast forward a few thousand years, and that imagery has stuck. By the time you're born, let's say the late 13th century, goats are already guilty. They're earthy. They're rebellious. They're prone to unpredictable behavior and will gleefully urinate on sacred vestments if left unsupervised. So naturally, they become associated with sin, lust, rebellion, and the devil. Which is hilarious, considering that half the village economy still depends on them. And yet, you go to church. You sit on a pew that smells like mildew and generational regret. You listen as Father Godfrey delivers a sermon about the sheep and the goats. You know this story. Everyone does. Matthew 25. He shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. And guess what? The left side is hell. Eternal fire. Damnation. Screaming. Probably some tax collectors. Meanwhile, the sheep, those docile, obedient fluffballs, get heaven. So basically, in the eyes of medieval Christianity, goats equals individualism, stubbornness, unrepentant sin. Sheep equals holiness, submission, spiritual success. Which, let's be honest, makes some sense. Sheep follow. Goats challenge. Sheep stay in groups. Goats climb mountains and steal pilgrim sandwiches. But here's the fun part. You love your goat. You can't help it. She may be spiritually suspect, but she gives milk, eats garbage, and headbutts the squire every time he gets too close to your cottage. She's your best friend, your confidant, your occasional foot warmer. So where does that leave you? In a glorious little gray zone, between orthodoxy and goat-based realism. Because while the church preaches that goats symbolize disobedience, everyone in your village knows that without them, the vicar's breakfast would be tragic. And despite their biblical baggage, goats still show up in monasteries, nunneries, and abbey gardens all across Europe. Because theology is important, but so is cheese. You see, monks, especially Benedictines and Cistercians, were goat owners. They raised them for milk, parchment, even manure for medicinal herbs. There are even accounts of friars who kept pet goats, much to the chagrin of nearby squirrels and anyone who liked their books unchanged. This duality, sacred versus sinful, divine versus mischievous, is everywhere in medieval life. Take the marginalia in holy manuscripts. You know, those tiny drawings in the corners of medieval books. They were supposed to be decorative, illuminated, devotional. But do you know what often shows up? Goats. Dancing goats. Musical goats. Goats riding unicycles, jousting, or making extremely unmonastic faces at bishops. Why? Because the monks copying these texts were bored. And because deep down, they knew the truth. Goats are funny. They're chaos wrapped in wool. And sometimes, even sacred texts need a reminder not to take themselves too seriously. But we're not done with goat symbolism yet. Because the devil, yes, that guy, also gets in on the act. By the later Middle Ages, Satan is frequently depicted with goat features. Horns. Hooves. Sometimes a goatee beard and unsettling posture that screams, "I just stole your daughter's dowry and your last apple tart." It's not hard to see why. Goats climb. Goats challenge boundaries. Goats don't respect fences, social norms, or the 10 Commandments if they're printed on edible vellum. And so they become the devil's mascot. Some witches, according to inquisitors, not actual fact, were set to ride goats to Sabbaths. Which, let's be honest, sounds awesome, but was more likely an excuse to persecute women who owned livestock. Still, the association sticks. In paintings, in poems, in courtroom accusations from terrified men who couldn't explain why their neighbor's goat was better at climbing stairs than they were. So here you are, a humble medieval peasant, trying to survive on barley stew and moral ambiguity, listening to sermons about the sinful nature of goats, while your own goat is waiting outside the church door, chewing the lace off a nun's slipper. She is, simultaneously, your source of life, a theological nightmare, and probably the reincarnation of someone with unfinished business. So how do you reconcile this? You don't. You live in tension. Because the medieval world is full of contradictions. The bishop rails against animal lust while secretly funding a monastery with goat cheese profits. The apocalyptic preacher condemns goat-like behavior, then rides one to the next village. And you? You try not to think too hard about it. You feed your goat. You go to Massachusetts. You confess your sins. You forgive her for eating your Bible. You laugh when she farts during communion. And slowly, you begin to suspect. Maybe the goat is holy. In her own chaotic, sideways, horn kind of way. After all, what's more spiritual than a creature that gives without asking, survives on trash, and refuses to pretend she's something she's not? What's more divine than honesty? Even if it smells like manure and chews your shoelaces. You lie back. Your goat settles beside you. The candle flickers low. And in the distance, you hear bells again. A call to prayer. Or maybe just your goat knocking over a milk pail for fun. Either way, you're ready. Because in this medieval world, there's no separation between the sacred and the smelly. It's all holy. Even the bleeding. Especially the bleeding.